Hi everyone. Okay, we're going to talk about legal and ethical issues in nursing. You might hear some crickets in the background, and that's because I am sitting outside enjoying this beautiful day. So we're going to talk about professional and liability insurance. Professional liability insurance protects nurses against lawsuits arising from errors or omissions and neglect, real or alleged, from delivering nursing care in clinical settings. So what they mean by that is errors or omissions or neglect, right? So we're not perfect. To err is human. We've talked about this on numerous occasions. And if we leave something out, it could potentially hurt someone, and we could be considered liable for that, as well as your neglect. Now, here's the deal. Some of you might be thinking, like, well, if somebody was neglectful as a nurse, they don't deserve, any protection. They should lose their license, blah, blah. But sometimes in life, we can be neglectful, and it can hurt someone. And one action and one time is not representative of your entire career as a nurse, and you might need that insurance to protect yourself, and not necessarily to protect yourself so that you can fight the claims, but to protect yourself so that you can move on and practice later in life. Real or alleged, so don't forget that sometimes people accuse you of things that you haven't done. So insurance policies. These are formal contracts between the insurance carrier and an individual or corporation for a fee. So the fee is your premium. The insurance policy will provide the insured party with a specific dollar amount of protection when certain injuries are caused by persons insured by the policy. So same as your car insurance, right? So professional liability policies. There's common elements of all professional liability policies. They provide payment for a lawyer in event of a lawsuit. They specify the limit of legal liability, and they pay settlements or jury awards. Specify the limits of legal liability. So this also protects your insurance company because there are going to be clauses of what they will consider they will protect you against. There's going to be certain acts that are going to limit them. And we are going to look at some limits of legal liabilities from different plans together in a few minutes so that we can kind of look over that. And you want to read those things because a lot of times some of the private plans, they almost seem too good to be true. Like 49 cents a day, which is like equivalent to $15 a month. It covers you this much, but the limits of liability is actually quite large, and you're not going to be protected for too much. So there are types of policies. There's occurrence-based policies, claims-made policies, individual, group, or employer-sponsored coverage. Occurrence-based policies. So these policies cover the nurse or any injuries arising out of incidents that occurred during the time the policy was in effect. So that means you are not covered for anything that happened previous to buying the claim or buying the policy, okay? If you want that, you need to get something called tail insurance. So it will cover you not just, so for example, if you buy a policy starting September 19th, 2017, anything that happened up to that time, you won't be covered for. Now, you could buy tail insurance. Usually will do retroactive coverage, but most places don't allow that. Now, I will say there's something called tail insurance. So say you have liability coverage from your insurer. So, for example, I have liability coverage from my work, which obviously we have talked about why you get personal liability coverage. Now, if I were to leave my work and go to another company, some of the policies, if you don't have something called a tail clause, will not cover you once you left, even if you were being sued for something you did while at that company. So that's what tail coverage is. And so, of course, that's also why you tend to buy personal policies yourself. And then depending on where you work, so like I work for an FQHC, so personal liability coverage Sometimes it doesn't get covered because it's in a government agency, so you have to look specifically at that policy. Okay, so we're going to look at different plans that they have out there for nursing. Obviously, I'm not going to get all the details because I'd have to really enroll, and I don't want to hear from a bunch of places. But so, as you can see here, malpractice insurance for nurses. Consider the likely gaps in your employer's malpractice insurance. So claims-made insurance may not cover suits filed after you've terminated your employment. So sometimes suits can occur where the actual award damage includes termination of your employment to cover the hospital from further liability. Policy limits may not be high enough to protect you and your co-workers. So this is actually quite well known. And it's okay if you don't know this. It just depends on where you work, but they're supposed to tell you this. Your policy limits, your personal where you work, the payout for nurses is going to be way lower than for a doctor. So what does that mean? Their policy might say if somebody sues directly and it's considered, they're including that employee who's a nurse, they might only pay out to $500,000, whereas with a doctor it will be $2 million. So if the policy limit isn't high enough to protect you and your coworkers, you're going to be left holding the bag of what's left over. Or because the policy doesn't cover you enough, you're no longer protected under it. It may not include lost wage reimbursement or license board hearing reimbursement. So what does that mean? Okay, so say you got accused of doing something or you did something negligent. For example, I knew a nurse who slapped a patient and it was terrible and it was awful, and it was in that moment, she was, you know, I can't make any excuses for her, but I know that she also had 25 years prior to that of a perfect, seamless record. But in that time, she was suspended without pay with the union, and so was the Board of Nursing. And so if her personal liability insurance, I know she had it, because our union at the time had an additional personal liability insurance. She had lost wage reimbursement. And you have to pay a bunch of money to the board for her reimbursement. And it also covered the extra classes she had to take, and she's been reinstated since then. She's actually a really good nurse. Since then, there's never been another issue. Coverage that likely doesn't extend outside of the workplace, such as when you engage in volunteer, moonlighting, or self-employed activities, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So here's some coverage details. I don't think it's going to go into the deepest of stuff, but we'll try our best. So inclusive insurance, coverage available for employed or self-employed, extensive coverage, various limit options up to $2 million. So we have to figure out exactly what they're talking about. What their limits are, right? Let's see, what if I need a higher limit? Okay, so here are some exclusions, okay? Errors and omissions insurance is also known as professional liability insurance. Should someone file a lawsuit against you in your practice, they'll cover defense cost. Negligence can include failure to make the right diagnosis. All right, common exclusions include malicious, dishonest, criminal, or illegal acts, including intentional violence or any law, regulation, statute, or ordinance. So if you, like, robbed a patient, you're not going to get covered. It's going to be excluded. Okay. Services you might provide under the name of any other business, charity, or organization that's not named in the policy. So you have to be really careful about who is named. If you have an LLC and it's not named, and they could claim that you're working under that LLC, they're going to do anything in their power not to pay out. Bodily harm to any person, including sickness or death. Well, right? Do you see that exclusion? You're like, well, what if my mistake accidentally caused death? You have to be really careful about what your exclusions say. Libel or slander, illegal discrimination, or punitive fine, penalties or damages. These are really wide range exclusions. So you want to be sure that you pay attention to things like this. Okay, so common elements of all professional liability policies: they provide payment for a lawyer in event of a lawsuit, they specify the limits of legal liability, and they pay settlement to jury awards. So we talked about that.